Okay, good afternoon to everybody and welcome to this webinar of the series Foresight Dialogues. This webinar is a joint initiative of the CMCC, the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change, and the University of Foscari in Venice in the framework of the Research Communication Week. Today, we will talk about the cooling solution, photography and science project on the future of air conditioning. I am Mauro Buonocore. I coordinate the communication and media activities at CMCC, and I will moderate this discussion that will involve Enrica Cian, professor at Foscari University of Venice, and the scientist at CMCC, Gaia Squarci, photographer, Jacopo, Crimi, science communicator and head at Elementsix, Rica, Cerbarano, project manager of Kublaiklan, and Antonella, Mazzone from Leverhulme Research Institute. This webinar is Foresight Dialogues is a series of webinars. Sorry, I missed the slide. I'm sorry. The Foresight Dialogues is a series of webinars realized in the within the Climate Change Communication Award, which is an initiative by the CMCC. The Climate Change Communication Award at Becca Balestra is an initiative that collects communication activities in the field of climate change. Communication intended in the wider meaning that you can imagine, from science outreach to arts and literature and journalism. So if you have a project in communication, you can apply to the award until June 22nd. The series of webinar is named after Foresight, which is the digital magazine edited by the CMCC. Is a digital place where we address in depth topics related to climate change and its interaction with society. In the digital magazine, you can find articles, interviews with experts, and our podcast series. All the past webinar of the series Foresight Dialogues are collected in the website. So if you missed some of them, you can go to the website and watch the videos. And the same you can do for the Research Communication Week events. The series of webinars that during this week have collected discussions and meetings with experts in the field of science communication. The Research Communication Week is an initiative of the University Foscari of Venice and is organized by Enrico Costa, and here you can find also contacts if you want to contact them. Just a very practical tip about your interaction with the speakers in this webinar. You can ask questions using the tab Q&A, question and answer, that you can find on the in the tools of the Zoom interface. But now I will leave the floor to our speakers to talk about the cooling solution, which is an exposition which is at the University of Foscari in Venice. But it is even more of an exposition because it is a synthesis that it is truly impressive in the way it merges together science and data taken from analysis of climate scenarios with ethnographic and anthropological implications, with visual language through photos and graphs, and a great effort in the editorial accuracy of the content, including the choice of every word that the authors have chosen and used to explain the implications of the the rising temperature in the world, in several countries in the world, and the solutions that we have to address it. So I would start from the science, because the science is the starting point of this project. I would ask to Enrica de Cian, Professor of Environmental Economics at Foscari University of Venice and scientist at CMCC, how did this photographic and scientific project start? Enrica, please.
Thank you, Mauro. Good afternoon. So yes, as Mauro already mentioned, the idea of this photographic project that you will have the possibility to visit at the physical exhibition in Venice or online exhibition that will be presented later on. So the idea really came about within the context of this research project, Energia, which you see the logo in this slide, and which have been coordinating for the past 5 years, thanks to a grant from the European Research Council. So as the acronym suggests, the name Energia stands for Energy Used for Adaptation. And the idea of this research was really to address and dig into specific forms of maladaptation. Maladaptation is a concept that, of course, relates to that of adaptation. And we know that people, cities, municipalities adapt to the risk of climate change, which arises from the intersection between vulnerability, hazards, such as extreme heat and exposure, by undertaking certain actions, certain behaviors. And we know that some of these responses can be also, let's say, good for the environment, such as greening a city. But some of these responses can actually trigger additional risks, such as air conditioning when we deal with heat. So really the motivation behind this project was really to try to understand whether people were and are adapting to climate change in a way that is actually building up new risk for climate change, but also other environmental issues related to heat waves and air pollution. So, and I should say that, I mean, it might sound like maybe a trivial research question, but I should say that when we started 5 years ago, there were no global assessments of this issue. And even this picture that you see here, which characterizes the notion of climate risk, came out only recently, a couple of years ago, acknowledging the potential risk that arises from people's responses and adaptation action. So what we did, we started off by collecting data, a lot of data, describing how people adapt to temperature. And specifically, we focus on energy-related behaviors. So we collected data about appliances, behaviors of people, mostly from statistical offices. So we mostly work with secondary data. And we tried to cover very different countries because we also wanted to understand a little bit the cultural differences. So we look at countries that already today are very hot, such as India, Indonesia, Brazil, but also Europe and OECD countries, which are less, have lower temperature, but have different socioeconomic and cultural conditions. So most of our work was really to try to put together these socioeconomic data with the climate and environmental information in order to understand the relationship between climate, temperature, and people's behaviors, and to develop also statistical models that would enable to characterize, let's say, the historical and the future prevalence of air conditioning. So I should say that we ended up focusing a lot on air conditioning, although we also covered some other energy services. And to develop models that also gave us the ability to project air conditioning in the future. So we work with big data and statistical models. Very quickly, one of our first results was to show essentially to characterize, if you want, the landscape of air conditioning adoption and prevalence across countries today, which is what you see in dark red in this pie chart. And you see the three leading countries, United States, Japan, and Australia. And they'll also characterize AC evolution in the future, in the next 30 years up to 2050, which is essentially this additional light red wedge that you see. And you see that over the next 30 years, other countries will become big users of AC, including countries such as Spain and Italy in Europe. Other places will remain, I mean, despite very high temperature, you see that air conditioning will remain relatively low. Then we turn to the questions why actually people are using this cooling solution across different countries. So we tackled, as I said before, emerging and developed countries. And here you see with these bars the different factors that can influence people's decision to adopt and use AC. And of course, climate, meaning the temperature that people perceive or think they perceive, is one of the major drivers. But then you see a big difference between emerging economies and developed countries. And you see that climate is really the key driver in rich economies, whereas hot countries, which are used to hot climate, there it's really a story of income and education. Then, I mean, AC adoption does not automatically translate into AC actual usage. So we also try to characterize the actual electricity consumption associated with air conditioning, again, across different countries. And here I'm simply showing 4 countries. And again, you see 2050 and in pink red and light red and dark red is the current situation. And I just wanted to draw your attention to a quick comparison between India and Italy, because India today has a prevalence rate of AC that is half that of Italy, meaning not even 20% of households have an AC, whereas in Italy we're about 40%. But if you look at the actual electricity consumption today for AC, in India is about 10 times the electricity used for AC in Italy. So few people use AC more. So there is also an issue of the intensity with which this technology is used. And when you put all the numbers together, I mean, we're talking about significant numbers, which could represent a large fraction of global electricity demand. Then, of course, we look at the environmental implication. Here you see CO2 emissions. Again, what you see essentially is that by 2050, AC air conditioning will account for about a quarter of CO2 emissions in almost all countries. And the projected increase is of a 2-fold increase in countries such as Italy or 3-fold increase in countries such as India. And when you accumulate these emissions over time, then again, the numbers become really significant. Finally, an important story of our research was the socioeconomic differentiation of AC adoption and usage patterns. And you see a staggering difference between rich people that you have on top and poor people that you have on bottom. Essentially, when you're rich, it doesn't really matter whether you live in Brazil or in Italy, you will be able to afford AC. And you see that among rich people, about almost all households will manage to have AC in 30 years from now. Whereas poor people, I mean, they remain kind of vulnerable to heat, again, no matter where they live. And I'll stop here, and then if there are questions, more specific questions on the scientific part, I will be happy to answer. Thank you, Mauro.
Thank you, Enrica. Thank you for your very clear presentation. And now I would ask, we see how the science behind this project and behind this topic is really complex. No, it is really it needs a lot of expertise in several fields. It needs expertise in energy, in economics, and in climate, of course. And I would ask to Jacopo Crimi, which is the founder of the Elementsix, an agency that deals with communication, specifically in the science outreach. What steps led from the complex data of a research project to a photographic exhibition, opening the door to a broader audience in a meaningful and impactful way? Who was needed to turn it into reality?
Okay, hi everyone. I hope you can hear me well. So my answer is in this picture. My first answer, let's say. So we really needed a team to do that, to transform the scientific data Enrica showed you in this dissemination product. So on this picture, I will come back to it later, but you see the Kublaiklan collective on the left. This nice group of people really help us in making it come to reality. Then Enrica, obviously, Gaia, and me. So my role is I'm the communication officer, meaning I take care of the communication of Enrica's project since the beginning. So this means that we did some communication efforts throughout the project. This communication effort is obviously based on peer-reviewed literature. So here's just a rapid screenshot of some of the publications which came out in these 5 years. And for each of them, or for the more interesting, most interesting of them, we drafted some press releases, we did some graphics, and so we tried to disseminate it while we were doing it. For some of these articles, we managed to get on the national press. And so I wanted to stress that basically it was a continuous effort. So when we started to address the final dissemination, we already had a lot of work done. We had dozens of press releases, we had a lot of graphs we reasoned on to try to see how best to represent the data we wanted to show. So just to show you an example, it's really an iterative process. So for what concerns the graphics, we normally do several tries. So for instance, on the left, you see the same data, part of the same data which we represented on the right. But as you see on the left, it's much less clear than it is on the right. So basically what we do at the beginning of each communication effort, we do several tries, and we try dozens of different shapes, different colors, and we basically see what works better. So then we had another problem, meaning this is the graphics, we had the facts, and then we have to reason about what visuals we wanted to include in our project. So the basis is obviously the air conditioning facade, as you see on the left. This is in Mumbai. This is very typical in every tropical cities we visited. This is actually an air conditioning on each, not even window, sorry, it's for each room, basically. But we couldn't do an exhibition with only air conditioning. Gaia taught me while we were working, because I was spotting her to only air conditioning, but we needed to tell a story which was more compelling. So you see on the right, this was a work in progress try. So we tried to see for each of the topic, which visuals we could think about. So the example goes, there is a second page, but it was just to give you an idea. So for each of this topic, we try to see what we could trivially photograph. And so this is part of our effort. We always try to see how to visualize. And obviously, as Gaia will tell you in each photographic project, you also learn by doing. Then there was another aspect which was very important when we started the photographic project. Enrica really wanted to try that we focus on solutions, because in a way, her scientific project was depicting a very green future. So when we discussed that, she mentioned that she really wanted to show, if possible, through the visual, some possible solutions or alternatives to this green future. So on the left, you see an installation which makes use, for instance, of terracotta to cool parts of building. You can find further details. I won't go through it in the website. So everything we are showing you today is actually on the website, thecoolingsolution.com, so you can find further details. On the right is just, it's an experimental building in Indonesia, which basically measures different solutions. You see a bunch of sensors here, different solutions to keep social houses cool without the user air conditioning. So they try different roofs, different forms of windows, different insulating glass, and try to see how the cost compare to the impact they have on the thermal comfort of the person. There is also another interesting aspect that while we were traveling and seeking for the solution, the first reportage we did, so we went on photographing, as mentioned, solutions. We interview architects and engineers. But as soon as we started the work, and when we started to look at the pictures, we immediately realized that the most interesting aspect was the social one. So we did some street photography, but this street photography really showed us that we needed to tell the story of those people. So the photography also told us how to bring forward the project. So coming back from India, we went we discussed with Enrica, and we really saw the lack of the ethnological approach we wanted to include in the project. So that's how we started to collaborate with Antonella, which we'll speak later. And so what is very interesting is that, in a way, I really want to stress that we did photography to try to illustrate, but at the end it shows us we could investigate through photography, and it came back in giving us the essential aspect, the emotional aspect we wanted to bring in. So how people do cool. So we needed some interviews and some personal stories. So thanks to Antonella, we managed to gather these topics, and they are now included in the exhibition. It's a very important part. So imagine at the end, we collected dozens of graphics, thousands of data, personal stories, interviews with architects. We had like a puzzle to recompose. We had like a lot of things are not included in the exhibition, obviously. We had maybe 3 times the material. But then we have to choose how to integrate everything in a coherent narrative. So the last step before implementing the cooling solution was to try to fit everything in a narrative. So where do we speak about a certain issue, and when? Do I speak about comfort before climate? Do I speak about climate before comfort? So that's the last step. But we could do it basically looking at our visuals, looking at all the materials we had, and by beginning the dialogue with Kublaiklan, with the curatorship. And the dialogue was essential in trying to give a shape to all the material and all the narrative we wanted to implement. I will stop here.
Okay, thank you, Jacopo. And now I would say that you mentioned the work that Antonella did from her ethnographic anthropological point of view. Antonella Mazzone is works at the Department of Anthropology at the University of Bristol. And Antonella, what can you tell us about your field work related to this project, especially in Rio de Janeiro, for example?
Hi, everyone. Yes, so I joined the project with Enrica, providing an ethnographic insight. So basically lived experiences of cooling strategies and heat in typically like communities that live in tropical areas, informal settlements, because they are most at risk of heat waves and increasing temperatures. And we were looking at how to get the perspective of people at the margins, the ones that no one talked about. And so through by applying virtual ethnography, because we were in the aftermath of a COVID-19 situation, so virtual ethnography, local contacts, we were able to gather the lived experiences of the participants with whom we communicated through virtual diaries, and we were able to participate. So the participants were able to build also their own narrative. It's not just about us asking questions, but they were sharing their own videos, they were sharing their own experiences, their diaries. And we selected people from two communities in particular called Faleci and San Carlos, but also we interviewed some people from wealthier neighborhoods such as Botafogo, and that gave us a little bit of perspective about people's strategies to cool their bodies in particular. And we interviewed 32 participants in total. And what we gathered in the end was the fact that, for example, people who live in marginalized communities, so the favelas, for example, they suffer from constant lack of potable water and sanitation. This is key. So hydration and hydro practices are key to afford cooling without air conditioning. So once you don't have that, once the water that you provided is actually dangerous for you, in fact, it caused a lot of illnesses to local population, then people living in favela, you understand that they don't have access to affordable cooling. Another point that we found was that they lacked access to green areas and water bodies as well because of the particular location. So favelas in Rio de Janeiro are located mostly uphill in areas that have been deforested in order to, build informal settlements. So it's a very densely populated region without ventilation and with limited access to transportation. So they could not seek shading, they could not seek refrigeration, natural refrigeration by going to public parks, for example. And they also did not have the time. So we found that through this research that access to the very basics of, cooling was not available for them. So, for example, people living in favela, they were relying on hydro practices, so using water with the rubber showers, which is the most used one, with unreliable water and with the risk of contracting infections. They were mostly going around wearing wet clothes but they were also referring to having some cough and also other health issues. They also reported to eat a lot of sweets that could give them some energy during the heat, and drink soft drinks and mostly alcohol, which are two strategies that are not particularly advisable, especially during heat waves or to avoid heat stress, because this particular consumption of food and drinks can lead to dehydration instead of hydration. They also lacked access to fresh food and fruit and vegetables because it's more expensive in respect to other non-perishable goods. And they also the only cooling strategy that they had was basically the use of fan, bearing in mind that the provision of electricity in favelas is basically very unreliable and unsafe. So people reported interruptions of electricity 4 to 5 times in a month, which lasted also for over an hour, which also implicates the fact that a lot of the food that they have in the fridge went bad. So we understand how people in favela are lacking the most basic access to cooling, whilst people instead living in a middle income neighborhood, they had more access to blue and green spaces, which was basically very close to where they live. They had reliable access to mechanical cooling and AC. They reported also that when it was too hot, they were calling an Uber, which also, or a taxi, which are basically refrigerated, versus the buses that other people have to take that do not have air conditioning at all. We found out that they do eat more fruits and vegetables, so they do keep hydrated also through food and more potable water. And also they have access to AC at work because of the discrepancies between the educational levels between people in favelas and more wealthier people. So in conclusion, we applied an intersectionality analysis lens to understand the cumulative effect of these disadvantages. And we found out that, people in favelas, they're very disadvantaged in respect to people living in middle-income neighborhoods. But we also found out that the income is not the only element. There are other cumulative social identities and disadvantages related to this. For example, being disabled and people with disabilities, whether they're in a middle-income country, in a middle-income neighborhood or low-income neighborhood, they share the same disadvantage of, for example, taking frequent showers or hydro practices. So, and this and much more, this will be discussed in future publications and research. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonella. And I would remind to our audience, that our participants, that they can ask questions, and I would ask the speakers that are already answering to some questions in the tab by writing down, dialing their answers. And now the cooling solution is basically as a science outreach project that is based, and the photos has got a big part of it. Gaia Squarci is a photographer and a videographer who divides her time between Milan and New York. Her works are published in many international media outlets and magazines. Gaia, you traveled across India, Indonesia, Brazil, and Italy to document something that is hard to represent. We usually say that climate change is really difficult to be represented in a picture, in a photograph, because it is something that refers to a long period. In some ways it is abstract, and it is really complex. And also climate change adaptation, a mitigation challenge, the rising of air conditioning, and the energy problem are very difficult to be captured in an image. How did you manage to document all these through your shoots?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mauro, and thank you, everyone, for having me. Do you hear me well?
Yes, perfectly. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Yes, so if we think of air conditioning as a topic, you can imagine how, for a photographer at the beginning, it was not easy to think about how to visualize it photographically. And I would say, I think it is the challenge, how to communicate about climate change is one of the main challenges of my field, documentary photography, documentary video. It is a topic that is very, very important to talk about, to get some results also out of this communication. But often it is not obvious how to visualize it and how to be able to connect to people on this topic. From the point of view of what we focused on, I would say that if we talk about thermal comfort and air conditioning, seeing it from a different perspective, thermal comfort, the rise of temperatures provoked by climate change, and the strategies that we use to keep cool in the spaces we inhabit are something that permeates, everyone's everyday life. And therefore, it is something that anyone can easily connect to. So we mostly decided to focus on the human experience. Jacopo and I discussed together which aspects of the scientific research could actually translate into like effective visuals. And it was not always easy, especially without having traveled to many of the places we visited. So we did contact people on the ground and planned ahead for most shoots, but at the same time, as always in the documentary context, we had to be flexible, and so some things fell through, and through the experience of being on the ground, some others' idea came up, and some photos were, you know, found depending on the situations we found ourselves in. From my point of view, the photograph's job can never be the one of explaining or illustrating a certain topic. And when that's the purpose, they don't actually add much to the work, and they just bore the viewers to death. But so in this case, you know, the purpose was scientific dissemination, so I had to be a little bit more obvious than I normally would to send a very specific message. But I also tried to take photos that contained clues, that had a, you know, dignity in and of themselves, and that kept a little bit of mystery. Maybe they needed to look at a little longer, so that the audience could pause, recognize themselves in certain situations, or put themselves in the shoes of those who have a different life experience, to empathize or to reconsider their habits. So even if we have a wider variety of means to cope with it than most people in the tropical countries we travel to, we all have experienced heat that we cannot bear, that does not put us in a condition to work or live well. And we have all felt on our skin how much the situation has been worsening in the recent years. So this is a universal experience that we can recognize ourselves in. So this is what we try to use. And in terms of message, I would like this work to speak about how intimately connected we all are, and how the lifestyle of some invariably affects others, even at different geographical coordinates. And to emphasize this point of view, we try to draw parallels between situations that could seem similar, either photographically or from the point of view of the scenes we were depicting. For instance, this image and this one have a very similar way of, you know, arranging the person in the middle of the frame, so they could look like a parallel. But this young man lives in an informal settlement in Rio de Janeiro, in a house made of wood and metal, and a metal roof with no windows, and the water that he can get is water that is unsanitary, as Antonella was saying, and he only has fans to keep cool. And for instance, this has the same kind of frame, but it is a very different situation related to an experiment on thermal comfort in Bolzano in a research center. And this is another example. On the left, we have a swimming pool used in a favela in Rio de Janeiro to keep cool. And on the right, we have my father close to Rome on the sofa. So we try to really connect to people's everyday life and human experiences. And in both in the catalog and in the exhibition, we used in the captions of the photos both the level of humidity and the temperature, to help people try to imagine what the temperature and the feeling could be in that situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gaia. And the cooling solution is is a project that has multiple phases, but the main of its phases is the exposition. The exposition that is accessible until the 31st of July at Foscari, University of Venice, at Cortile Grande of Foscari, and at Foscari Zattere. The exposition has got presents many graphics, many words, text, and many photographs. There is a beautiful catalog that you can take at the exposition. So I would ask to Rica Cerbarano, who is a project manager of Kublaiklan, the curatorial collective that explores accessible ways of interacting with photography. Rica, what are the main challenges you had to face in the cooling solution?
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Mauro. Let me say that, first of all, there were really many challenges. And the first one was the fact that we had to transpose the photographic project and scientific project into an accessible language, but for a broad audience and not only for the academic field, as you already said, but I will speak about it later. In terms of practical challenges, we actually entered the project when things were mostly done, but we had to put everything together. And as Jacopo said, there were dozens of data, text, and pictures. So the idea was for sure, the biggest challenge was to bring together all these kind of different elements and in the way that they would be somehow intertwined and dialoguing with each other in balance. And another challenge was that we had to realize the project actually into 3 forms. So actually, you mentioned the exhibition that is now at the CFZ and the Cortile Grande, sorry. But the project has 3 forms. The first one is the catalog, then there is the exhibition, and then the website. And so we had to find a narrative that could work, across all these 3 devices. And we decided to start off actually with working on the catalog, and that's why I'm showing it as first image. And the idea was to identify with the catalog a broader selection of content that would form the main narrative. And let me say that in order to build this whole narrative, it was very important all the constant exchange that we had with Jacopo, Gaia, and Enrica, as Jacopo already said. So we are a collective, so we are very used to working this kind of collaborative method with this collaborative approach. But in this case, it was very important to build a dialogue with also other people that were part of the project and that of course had worked on the project for a long time before us. So, but coming to the catalog, I can say that of course the editorial design played a crucial role, a key role in making the content accessible. And as you can see in this first slide, the graphic identity was conceived precisely to express the urgency of the search for alternative solutions to cope with the condition of extreme heat and enhancing both images and data. So here you see how we design the data, the infographics, and also we decided to put some quotes that somehow would highlight some key concept extrapolated from the text. And as I said, also images were laid out in a way that could be somehow highlight and had a powerful impact for people and for readers in this case. So we found for the catalog, we found different way to lay out the content in order to also differentiate the different levels. and for instance, with different backgrounds and colors. Quite the same we did with the exhibition, and this difference in this case was expressed through the use of different materials and different display solutions, like also if some pictures were framed, some other were not, as you can see in this picture. And another big challenge in this case was actually that the exhibition was spread across 2 locations, as we already said. These are the installation views from the CFZ location, so the indoor location. And this is the outdoor location at the Cortile Grande. And here, in this case, we decided to keep the narrative much more streamlined, much more simple. And actually, we decided to dedicate this space to the interaction with public, with people, and also with passers-by, because being a public space, maybe, you know, the people could just encounter the exhibition somehow by chance. And this interaction is developed through a series of questions that are about the behavior, the personal behavior of people to cope with the heat. And so people could apply their stickers on the exhibitions panel to answer their personal questions. So they apply the stickers in correspondence with the answer. And finally, the last shape of the project is the website that was developed by Elementsix, so by the agency of Jacopo. And the website brings together all the content that is in the catalog in order to make it accessible to anyone from anywhere in the world. Also here you can find an interactive part where you can answer some questions. But let me say that the website, it's really one of the most important part, because it's conceived really as the main dissemination platform. It's the one that then in the future will be most likely be accessed to, you know, a lot of people from all the world, from wherever, anywhere in the world. So, and here you have some screenshots from the website where you can really find the same graphics and the same contents that you also find in the catalog and in the exhibition. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rica. So if you haven't visited the exhibition yet, you can have an idea through the website. And we started this panel saying that everything starts from the science. The science provides data, information, the perspective for the communication. But Enrica, on the other hand, has the purpose of working on this photographic project influenced your way of carrying on this research in some way?
Thank you, Mauro. I would say definitely yes, and I can explain how in a second. I just wanted to say that especially when you do research that is based on data and statistical model, very often you lack a true connection with the object you're studying. And this also means that, of course, you understand the results that you're generating, but you really don't, I mean, you sort of remain detached a little bit from those. And for me, this outreach project, and especially the photographic part, was really, gave me the opportunity to actually live the experiences that I was missing, and that gave me the possibility to truly and deeply understand also the social relevance of the work that I was doing. And I think, I mean, this also contribute to somehow change the research attitude of people, at least of myself, because somehow you feel a greater responsibility when doing your work. In practice, also the possibility to collaborate with Antonella and with her amazing ethnographic work really gave me the opportunity to appreciate the value of combining different methods, so statistical methods and models, which is what I do, with more in-depth analysis really based on the lived experiences of people. And this combination, what you call technically mixed method approaches, is really something that that I would like. I mean, I knew about that. I mean, it's a method that is well established and it has been used in other fields. It's been used also in this field, but I was not, let's say, I didn't have experience with this type of mixed method approach. And now I really see, I mean, the value. It's really, it can really contribute to have a better understanding of the results. So this is something that I would like to carry forward in my future research. And then the second aspect, which was really amazing, was, I mean, the immense benefits that I had from the network that Jacopo developed when he was preparing all the scientific background behind the trips that Jacopo and Gaia did. An amazing network that actually, again, it's something that will remain. In May, we organized a workshop where we actually brought together many of the people that Gaia and Jacopo met during their travels. And it gave us the opportunity to organize an amazing workshop on a very specific topic of space cooling, but really bringing together many different perspectives from ethnography, anthropology, but also psychology, engineering, architecture, urban planning. And so I think these are things that will stay and will influence my way of doing research in the future.
Thank you, Enrica. And now I would ask to Jacopo and Gaia, how do you focus on solutions? How did you select the solutions that you took into consideration for your work?
Gaia, you start?
Yes, I can start. So I will share my screen. If I can, I'll go back 1 second to also talk about how we selected some of the people that we worked with, and then I will start talking about the solutions. So even if the work warns against emissions and consequences that air conditioning carries with itself, it is instrumental in protecting the most fragile subjects of society, so children, the elderly, and people with disabilities. So we met, for instance, this couple of people with disabilities in the periphery of Rio de Janeiro. They had an AC unit. They used it only in the bedroom and only during the night. And even so, during the summer, it caused the cost of electricity to rise up to costing about 40% of their monthly budget. So this, for instance, is an example of energy poverty. Then we focused on different kinds of vulnerability. For instance, the shower is a daily moment, something that Antonella told us about also in her ethnographic work in terms of the people who she worked with in Brazil. And actually she put us in contact with a lot of people on the ground. And on the left, we have a man taking a shower with his daughter, and he is healthy, but he's in a very difficult living condition. And on the right, we have an elderly woman in Italy who is vulnerable for another set of reasons, because she was diagnosed with cancer. We tried to work with people both in moments of rest at home and moments of work. For instance, here we have a man on the door of his house in a slum in Mumbai, and we can see how he connected to the electricity through cables that connected to the main grid. And here we have outdoor workers who remain vulnerable to heat because they have no way to protect themselves during the long hours of work. Or for instance, here we chose a very, daily moment. This was August. It was very hot in the center of Milan. And these two young men were trying to find shade under a tree on a bench. What we considered is also that modern architecture created for the middle class creates the need for air conditioning. In other countries, here we have on the left India, and on the right Brazil, but we have it in Italy too. Basically, there's been a growth of the mentality of building for the biggest profit with the lowest expense. So there we have buildings where units are isolated from each other, and that creates the need for air conditioning because the air doesn't circulate, and there's no a good isolation. For instance, in Italy, we used to have thick walls and high ceilings, and very few houses built for the middle class now have that. In India and Indonesia, especially, we found some examples of vernacular architecture that uses physics and knowledge that has been shared for centuries to keep environments cooler and keep the air circulate. And this is another example in Indonesia. It is a very popular now luxury architecture studio that uses bamboo to build facilities. Bamboo is not part of traditional architecture in Indonesia, but the buildings that they create still use those same principle that vernacular architecture use, and it enabled us also to start talking about the fact that obviously it is easier to find alternatives that are accessible to the wealthy, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like this. And in terms of working with new technologies, experts are trying to make more alternatives accessible to the middle class. And talking with some of them, for instance, we realized that while costs might be a little higher trying to build an energy efficient building, then, for instance, there's a lot of advantages in terms of the money that can be recovered, because the cost of energy is the consumption of energy is lower.
Jacopo, you are muted, Jacopo.
Yes. So as Gaia mentioned, as you know, from my first slot, we were very keen on trying to find some possible alternatives. I mean, what exists out there? Obviously, we didn't manage to address everything. We had also some interesting aspects in the tab Q&A. So we mainly focus on AC, I have to say. But for instance, we also try to see what alternatives, what technological alternatives were out there. So there is a very famous example. This is the Museum of Tomorrow in Rio de Janeiro, which was designed by Calatrava. And basically, its AC system uses seawater for heat exchange. And the seawater in the Bay of Rio de Janeiro is around 20 degrees during the summer, which is basically very low thanks to the currents you have there. Very low if compared to freshwater resources, which are normally used for heat exchange. So this is for an example of high advanced technologies which use much less energy. They have also a lot of solar panels. But this is a system which obviously is not affordable for, this is made for a museum, and so it is a different kind of scale. So we know a lot of alternatives exist to SC, even very efficient SCs, but they are very expensive, and the payback period is not enough to convince the lower class to buy them. So I just wanted to showcase a little bit of the solution alternatives we found. This is a shot of the I already mentioned earlier. So I want this is this live scale experiment in Tegal, which is a city in Indonesia. And here you see a student which is putting together all the sensors. You can find further details in the catalog and on the website in the exhibition. This is a hospital. This is a drone view of a hospital in Curitiba, which is a city which is the capital of Paraná in Brazil. And basically this hospital is highly efficient. Thanks to the climate is quite fortunate in Curitiba because it sits on a plateau, so you don't have that much of temperature and humidity as you have in other parts of Brazil. But still, the constructor, which is called Zero Energy, it's a firm, managed to have a budget of electricity which is very close to zero on an annual basis, basically, thanks to on-site generation. Then as mentioned, we tried to investigate and to see positive examples. This is a social project you can find in Rio, which is called Revolution Solar. You can find it easily on the web. And basically they apply a rental bundle. They take up the upfront costs, and they rent basically at no cost, with no benefits, let's say, to the most vulnerable part of the population. This is the favela of Babylonia. The solar panels. So this allows very low-income communities to afford basically solar panels, which they can use to power their appliances, for instance. So basically, as mentioned, we looked for alternatives, but the alternatives, as you can guess from this changing picture, are not only technological based. The alternatives are also behavioral. So you may not have the choice. So for instance, maybe for these kids, which are from the favela near Rio, and this is a very famous place near Rio where they enjoy the Sunday and keep it fresh. But a very important part, as Antonella already mentioned, is really the behavior. So we can both implement behavior from our perspective, but certain people do not have the choice. So they have to implement some alternative behaviors, as Antonella mentioned before. So we try to give a broad landscape of what was out there, just to trigger reflections, I think.
Thank you, Jacopo. And coming back to the ethnographic point of view of the project, Antonella, during your ethnographic fieldwork, you observed that people living in slum-like conditions are more exposed to thermal discomfort during the hot season. And what do you mean with the words trapped by heat? And can you also explain the concept of cooling poverty?
Thank you for this question. So trapped by heat means a situation where people are unable to leave their home or their neighborhood because of certain impediments. For example, as I mentioned earlier, some favelas might be on the sea level, and this is more in the suburban areas. But the favelas that are considered in this project are on uphill. This means that in order to come uphill and come back, you have to either walk a lot, which is not advisable, especially during the hottest hours of the day, or take some public transportation, which are inexistent and expensive. So there are very few public services. The rest is some informal means of transportation that people cannot afford. Okay, so if you cannot afford to leave the favela, to leave this very intensely dense place to go and seek some cooling in a park or go to the beach, it means that you're trapped there, right? So they are trapped in this heat because of the lack of transportation, because of the lack of means to escape that situation. They're also trapped by heat by their building, right? So because most of these buildings are self-made, they use metal roof, most of them in asbestos, using asbestos, which is a renowned material that can cause cancer, and they're trapped there in this overheated house. And most of the time, in fact, they sit by the porch to try to escape the heat from the from the house, and they're trapped in the heat from the favela level. So you have several traps there. Moreover, it's trapped by the heat because there is a lack of greenery. So you don't see, so in this particular case, you have greenery behind these houses. But most of the time, people lived in very dense areas on top of each other with buildings. So you don't really have access to green areas, right? And so the microclimate is the microclimate and the overheating of these favelas is basically exacerbated by the lack of greenery, and also by the lack of ventilation, right, in between houses, precisely because they're one on top of each other. And so by looking at this physical infrastructural deficits, we came up with the concept of cooling poverty, which is not just related to, for example, access to electricity, which the concept of energy poverty is based on, or affordability, or, for example, the reliability of the network. We were focusing more on, for example, the impact of, yes, the climate and the microclimates, but also the infrastructures and assets. We were thinking about social inequalities and the impacts of cooling poverty on health and education and work standards. So basically, we were trying to have an holistic view on the lack of access to cooling, not just with electricity or with access to technologies, but on the infrastructural level. So understanding how cities, but also villages, if they lack certain infrastructure, physical infrastructures of greenery or urban geometry, appropriate urban geometry, appropriate buildings, which can be vernacular or whatnot, as a result, they impede people to access free cooling strategies. So, for example, hydration, which you think is accessible for everybody, but sometimes it's not. And it's not just a matter of physical infrastructure, but also social infrastructure. Some people live in isolation and they cannot attain certain services. Some people have disabilities and they cannot obtain certain cooling strategies. So all of this, it will be discussed in a paper which has been submitted recently. So hopefully it will be available soon to everybody for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonella. And we have seen the huge quantity of material, the good quality of the material, but we know that the content is not enough. You can have data, you can have pictures, you can have graphs, but you also need a way to present the content that is consistent with the aim of the project. And so I would ask to Rica, what are the best strategies that can be put in place to bring science outside the boundaries of the scientific community, and how have you applied them to this experience?
Yeah, so first of all, for us, for the collective, was the first time that we were working on a project with a scientific background. So we were we were the first to be the outsider of a scientific field, as we work with photography mostly. So we were not really used to this kind of project. And so in order to build a narrative that would speak to our broad audience, we thought that the most honest thing to do would be to be honest and with ourselves and put ourselves on the same level as the audience itself. The audience that, of course, is unfamiliar with the topic of air conditioning, or more broadly scientific topics. And so in this way, we could really put ourselves in their shoes and understand what they might not understand visiting the exhibition or reading the catalog. So this was a more general strategies behind the project, but speaking more about real strategies, first of all, was crucial to emphasize the photographs, which are, usually more considered as more immediate or at least attractive than text or data, so that we could give people the opportunity to approach the narrative first through the images, and so be intrigued by what they see. Then, if they wish, there are additional layers of depth that can be somehow can give the possibility to go deeper in the narrative, and these are the captions to each image or quotation that present the key concepts that were extrapolated from the text of the research, and then the introductory text to each section, because the exhibition was divided into also the catalog into 5 chapters, and these introductory texts are the most substantial part of the narrative, we can say, and the more important also to understand the framework of the whole project. And then, of course, there were the data and the infographics that a bit more like photographs may attract the visitors or readers because of their visual impact, we can say, but then they are really dense with contents and information. In terms of experiencing the content, the variety of layouts, as I already said before, both in the catalog and in the exhibition and then in the website, somehow allows the narrative to proceed at a steady but diverse pace, always keeping the visitor or the readers, again, attention very high, very attentive. And in addition, the interactive element, the element of interaction was very important in engaging an audience that may not be familiar or used to reflect on such topics. So especially in the public space, you can really be able to reach a different audience, especially when you engage them in a physical interaction with the installations. And finally, last but not least, there's another method that we adopted to make the narrative more engaging, which is the identification of some personal stories that in some way can give back the humanity to the whole project. And so for each chapter, we thought to include a couple of personal stories of people that Jacopo and Gaia met during their travels, and these stories are narrated through first-person quotes that were extrapolated from the interviews they did, and this I think that is very useful for the viewers and for the readers to empathize more, more with the project itself. Yeah. And if you have other questions, of course, I can.
Okay, thank you, Rica. Now I would conclude this round of discussion with Jacopo, focusing a little bit on the impact of this project. How and what are the results? And did you already manage to assess the impacts of the outreach of the project?
Okay, thank you for your question. So I would say the feedback from our peers is excellent. But our peers I mentioned in the academia, we really had a lot of compliment, and so we really a lot of positive return. Unfortunately, or luckily, the exhibition is free for entrance. So we don't really have a real assessment of how many people are going there. And this is really a problem for me. I mean, I don't know how many people are going there, but we don't want to preclude the entrance or to have people fill in. So we don't know. This is a picture from the opening. And we guess tomorrow there is a art night in Venice. So we will be there with Gaia and Enrica. So I can tell you how many people are coming, but I honestly don't have a direct feedback of how many people are coming. I will show you a little bit of hints I have in this direction, but this is the main aspect. I would like to stress to all the attendees that our main focus now is to try to make it travel. So if anyone of you who is listening has a good contact or works for an organization who has some spaces to host the exhibition, I invite you to please contact us. We are in contact with Oxford. We are in contact with several prestigious institutions to make it travel, but it's never enough, let's say. So our real focus would be to make it travel after August. So please get in touch with us. We had also good feedback, I would say, from the press, meaning we've been featured in Internazionale, Cartaccius, which is a very nice paper who has a nice portfolio section. You can see on the left. So it was last week, so you're too late to buy it. But anyway, so this was a real good feedback. They featured also on their Instagram. We are in contact with other news website, which will probably do something. We've been on TGR, which is the regional TV news in Italy, the Veneto regional news, and also on the cultural. And I mean, we had several features on television, national television, and regional television. So I would say the feedback from the press is good, mentioning taking advantage from this, but this is really the only assessment I can have. We never had such an interest in all the projects I worked with, so I could say that we in a way managed. I would say also that I managed to I talk about the project to many people. I show them the catalog, and for the first time, I work in this field since 10 years. For the first time, I had persons which are not interested in climate change asking me questions. So I guess this is a good indicator, a proxy also. We have a guest book also at the exhibition. So if we can judge from that is another aspect. We had a lot of compliments there, and so that's another aspect and another way we have to judge the impact. Last but not least, as mentioned, and as Rica mentioned, we had these interactive panels in the outdoor exhibition, and as you can see, they began to become a problem, because we had much more answers than we were expecting. So, for instance, you don't see much here, but why will you buy an AC? On the left top side, it's getting too hot, and on the right low side, it's I don't want to buy one. So you see, we have these two big clusters. And very interestingly enough, also I would say on the left, we have what is your cooling solution. On the bottom left, we have water, mentioning using water, not drinking. And on the right, we have shaded outdoors. And we didn't expect that. A lot of people reply in the middle. So I guess they go to the seaside. So anyway, this is people interpret the question in a way we were not expecting. You have also digital version of the catalog. You can easily find on the website under the label quiz. And I invite you to see our project on the website and give us some feedback if you want. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jacopo, and I would like to thank you all the speakers, Rica Cian, Jacopo, of course, Gaia Squarci, Rica Cerbarano, and Antonella Mazzone for this interesting discussion, and most of all for their contribution to the cooling solution. And closing this webinar, I want to thank all the participants and the audience, and invite all of you to visit the cooling solution at Cortile Grande Ca' Foscari and at Ca' Foscari Zattere. Thank you for being part of this webinar, and see you in the next webinar by CMCC. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.